Thank you very much, Michelle, Eleanor, for inviting me. Thanks everybody for coming. It's just such a huge and interesting subject, so I'm just going to try and put some order on it. Bear with me, I'm going to rattle through it because there's quite a lot of it, but I hope we'll have time to have a discussion at the end. If you're still talking to me at that point. But okay, so a history of humans, but humans have been around millions of years, at least 5 million years, but we're not talking about any of the other species. There are many, many species of humans. The Floresiensis ones were only about so high, apparently. Homo erectus, they're the most successful human species that's ever lived. The Neanderthals, they were already in Europe when we turned up. But we're talking about our sort, Homo sapiens, a little family beginning in Africa something like 200,000 years ago. Every time I look it up, they've moved the date a bit, but let's just say 200,000 years ago, enough of a genetic mutation to make a different species, our sort. So as I say, yeah, a history of humans, our sort. Okay. You have to imagine this tribe, slightly different from everybody else, all the other humans around. They set off on the journey and they are exactly the same as we are. If we could speak their language, we could settle in and they would be just like us. They could go to school and talk to us and play chess and all the rest of it. So I tried to draw a timeline, a graph of the population since we began, as it were, and that graph would be a great long narrow band right round this room. So I've sort of squashed it up a bit so that we could have a look at it in little segments. So each of these vertical bars represents 10,000 years. And this is the population of humans as we travel through time. It hardly moves at all. Of course, this is meaningless without some sort of scale. So here's a scale. 100 million, 2, 3, 4, 500 million people. So as I move this along and the time moves, you can see what happens to that red line and the population that it represents. Yes, Tim, there we go. Off we go. 10,000 years, another 10,000 years. Nothing much is happening to the population of humans because on this scale, it's still too small to register. Of course, the population is actually fluctuating all the time. You had good years and bad years. But on the whole, we're still hanging on in there. And 60,000, 70,000, 80,000 years have passed, and still the population is too small to show up. 100,000 years, nothing yet. Now, up until now, all we've seen are the remnants of people, some tools, and the skeletons, bits of skeletons. But we start seeing more and more of their artwork. That was just a rock carving from that sort of 75,000 years ago. Oh yeah, hang on, beep. Out of Africa, about 70,000 years. So up until this time, they've all been in Africa. So when people ask me, where are you from? I say, well, I'm Irish, but my family's from Africa. I hear yours is too, because it is. So we move out of the northeast of Africa and into South Asia, and then all the way down into Australia. Been there a long time. Not New Zealand, by the way, just Australia. And it's too cold in Europe, really, because of the Ice Age until 45,000 years ago. When we first move up and into North Asia, what we call Russia now. This is the earliest sculpture, statue that we found, called the Lion Man. It's found in Germany, what's Germany now, approximately 40,000 years old. And this is significant because finally we have reached a global population of about 100,000 people. Of course, nobody knows for sure, but this is just an estimate. So we're moving along and we're getting closer and closer. Still, the population is too small to register. Lots of graffiti coming along now. We can find traces of real people, real humans. 30,000 years. 25,000 years ago, people crossed from Russia, what's now Russia, into North America. And then eventually, oh look, oh yeah, this is from France. You know these ones, beautiful rock art. Eventually go down into South America. So most of the world is covered at this point, approximately 15,000 years ago. And we move along now, and finally, we can see the present day. On the right-hand side, present day, and the last few thousand years. And this is where it gets very exciting, because the population begins to rise rapidly. So, about 4,000 years ago, we're up to 50 million people. This is a huge jump from 50,000 people. But it keeps getting higher and higher. So, where are we now? 2,000 years ago, 200 million people. But we've hardly started because, look, 300 million people, and then 500 million people. This is only 500 years ago. And then, now, the top of that line doesn't fit on that graph. That graph represents about 1 billion people. But actually now we're on 8.2 billion people. So at this scale, you'd need to have a graph which is 8 times taller than the screen. So it'd be somewhere way up in the sky to represent the number of people. And I'm doing it like this because it sort of shows how rapidly things have changed so recently. 8,200 million people, approximately. And the thing is, the mad thing is that, oh look, here we are. This is just I squashed the whole graph down so you can see that transition, which is just so extraordinary. That is not it. That's not the end of it, because it's still growing at an extra 80 million a year. So it took almost 200,000 years to get to 80 million, and now we're doing it every single year. And 80 million people a year is the same as more than 200,000 extra people every day. So it's not the number of people born, it's the number of people extra to the ones who die, balanced out with the ones who die. So that's whatever, the population of Cork City, something like that, extra. So you imagine Cork City popping up every day around the world. So that's the sort of, well, I find it extraordinary, and yet somehow it doesn't seem to be seen as that or commentated upon in those terms. But that's where we're at the moment, a bit more than 200,000 people. So move along, and I just want to have a look at this bit here. What caused that turn in the graph? What happened approximately 8,000 years ago to change the direction of the graph so dramatically? So here we're zooming in on the graph to have a clearer look. And as I say, it would be way up high if we could see the same thing, the whole thing. Now, it's not that we had suddenly more babies, not at all. Humans have always had approximately the same number of babies until very recently. So maybe 9 or 10 or 12 babies per woman, per mother. So we didn't have any more, but what happened is that the death rate, which normally would be in balance, began to fall. And if they're not the same, the population will change. Because the death rate fell a little bit, that meant more babies survived to become children, and more children survived to become teenagers and had their own babies. And it doesn't take very much to make that graph start going upwards. But what happened to the death rate? Why did it drop? So if we have a quick look at the main causes of deaths amongst humans, because we are quite exceptional in the war part. Not many species would put war as part of one of their main causes of deaths, but we humans do, but we also have predators, of course, disease and starvation. Now, we haven't done anything about wars, never have done, there's always going to be wars, but we were working hard to get rid of all the predators, even at that time, 8,000 years ago, but there were still predators. The key thing that caused that shape was farming. And farming changed everything because it lowered the number of people who starved to death as children, as babies. But it's quite interesting about farming. We know that it started about that time and it's spread around the world and it's very exciting and lots of things happened. But imagine people started herding cattle and other livestock and growing grains to eat. But it seems to me that this had to be a very drastic attempt to avoid starving to death, because nobody in their right minds would choose. See, on the left-hand side, hang on, then I got a close one. On the left-hand side is the wild grass that has been bred to be wheat, what we call wheat, on the right-hand side. But when we first started farming, the best that was available was that einkorn, which is on the left, prickly, hard, miserable thing to eat. You would not choose that if you had the option of a juicy salmon or a venison steak or something. This was famine food, this is starvation food. So the whole farming business was caused because people ran out of things to go and hunt or scavenge. It is not just the grain, it's also, if you were herding cattle, you would spend your whole life guarding them. And people still do, because of course your flock of sheep or your herd of cattle are prey to all the animals and all the other tribes and all the other hungry people all around you. So you wouldn't be able to sleep. You would have to guard them all the time. If you were a hunter-gatherer and you brought back a bison and you lived off that for a month and you just sat around snoring after your big heavy meals, grand. But when you started doing this, when we started doing this, you wouldn't be able to relax at all. But despite all the downsides to farming, a lot of work apart from anything else, it was successful and more babies survived and more children survived and more babies were born. And farming became much more normal, and it spread so that your neighbours were no longer your enemies. You were perhaps more in partnership, and it wasn't such a big deal to protect your crops. And we've been working on farming and making it better and more productive ever since. Eventually we trained animals to help us, and we've been breeding different sorts of grains and different sorts of livestock ever since. Lovely. More pictures of sheep. I happen to like sheep. Okay, so we know about farming. We're very good at it. This country, this part of the world. Yeah, more animals. Eventually, very recently, in the history of humans, we mechanized farming. We don't even need any horses and cattle anymore. We use diesel. And that has made a huge difference to the quantity of food produced. And it's all about food, trying to get through the winter. If you live in the temperate zones of the world, winter's coming. Winter's always coming. So you have to be prepared. That's what people would work for the entire year, is to have enough to put by in the autumn to get you through the winter. We're very good at that now, and food has never been as plentiful or as cheap. So historically, that means within the written record of people, on average, the proportion of your income that you spent on food was about half. Whatever you earned, half of it would go on food for the family. Today, around the world, it's about 10%. But in Ireland, it's only 9%. But you wouldn't believe that if you listen to the people complaining about the price of groceries and super value. What are they charging for milk, butter and cheese and everything? And of course, people always complain, but it's because they don't quite realise where we've been. It might be hard now. It's been really hard in times past. Okay, but that's not the entire reason for that curve, but food has been an enormous part of it. Now, to illustrate this, here are Jack and Marion on their wedding day in 1953. Now, they, typical humans, had lots of babies. Mary, John, Michael, Maggie, Kitty, Helen, Tim, and Ed and Andy. And that's me on the right, that's Tim. See, I've hardly changed at all. This is about 1970, I think. And as I said, this is not, they had 9 children, 8 of them survived, completely normal. That's not the thing that's abnormal about this picture. It's quite completely normal to have that many children in the history of humans. Just like robins have lots of babies, and so do fish. Most fish don't look after their babies, but I just chose this sort, the cichlids, who actually mind their babies in their mouths. Every single species on the planet produces more offspring than are needed to replace themselves. So, again, insects don't normally look after their babies, but hawthorn shield bugs do. And I just thought this was a nice picture. And the mum and looking after all the baby shield bugs. Not just insects and plants and birds, plants. So dandelions, hundreds of little seeds, and ducklings, and what else? Rabbits, baby rabbits. People have this saying about, breeding like rabbits. Everything breeds like rabbits, or rabbits breed like everything else. Because as long as the birth rate is equal to the death rate, the population stays the same. So if humans have 2 babies that survive to produce their own babies, the population stays stable. It doesn't matter if you have 1 baby every 2 years or thousands of babies every year. Most of those babies will be killed. They'll die of those same things. Of course, acorns mostly get eaten. Giraffes probably get eaten as well a lot. The surprising thing about this picture is not how many babies my parents had, it's how many survived. And the main reason is that we were never hungry a day in our childhood lives. I can't remember us ever even missing a meal. And that is the exceptional thing if you compare it to almost all of history. Probably only princes and queens and princesses would have that kind of luxury of food every single day without fail. And so I gave us little crowns to signify how important we all are. And that, 30 years later or something, that there, Jack and Marion are still there in the middle, and the children are all there, and now there are grandchildren and some hangers-on, and that's how quickly the family grew. And that was about 2003 or something, and we've never had a reunion since. But I tell you, you couldn't get everybody in the picture. It's frightening how many people there are now. And of course, yes, some have been lost, some have died along the way, but most have survived because, look at us, we're all middle-class white people living in Western Europe. The extraordinary thing about this as well is that we weren't so exceptional after all. It wasn't just us that this was happening to. When my parents were born in the 1930s, the world population was 2 billion. By the time I was born, it had doubled. And now, it's doubled again. And my parents are both still alive and living in Wexford. And they're well and happy and nice, and they're lovely people, and they make cakes and go gardening and have intelligent conversations. But look what's happened in one lifespan. It's less than 100 years. They're 96 or something like that. Mostly down to food, but it's so plentiful and so cheap that there are people these days who actually get ill eating too much food, which is unheard of in the history of humans. But what a success story for humans. Most babies in Ireland survive, and lots of happy families, and all's well. All these lovely humans, vast numbers of us living on a beautiful planet. But the problem is slightly that the rise in population of humans has had a pretty savage effect on the other things that live here. So the Carolina parakeet is gone, moho, golden toad, quagga, Zanzibar leopard, passenger pigeon, great auk, Bengal tiger, Pinter Island tortoise, Tasmanian tiger, and of course the dodo. Those are just very, very few of the species that humans have killed off. Humans on their own. These lads, the dodos, probably the most famous extinct animals, apparently they were lovely. Apparently they were very inquisitive. They came up to the sailors to see what they were doing, and nosy and interested and delicious. And so they were all eaten. I think that's pretty sad, really. In this country and in Europe, we managed to kill off the, what have we got? The Irish elk, the woolly rhino, the mammoth, the cave hyena, the Sicilian wolf, that's a sawfish, a moose, European cave lion, North Atlantic right whale, a pika, different sorts of bison, Balearic Islands cave goat, slender-billed curlew, button quail, hermit ibis, and the pied raven. Not all of them would have been native to Ireland, but a lot of them were. We would have had these things flying around with our other ravens, and I think that's a shame. Just a few of the many species. And of course, we can blame rich guys with their guns and they are partly responsible. And we can blame big logging companies with their huge saws. And yes, they are partly responsible. But there's a whole other element to what humans have done. We see this fine young man posing for the camera, North American Indians, North American native peoples. We have this idea that they were living in perfect harmony with their environment, fitting in with nature, not causing any harm. Not just those guys, but the people living like them around the world. Well, let me just show you some of the species that were killed off long before the Europeans turned up. The horse. There were horses in North America long before Europeans brought them back again. They were never ridden by people, they were just eaten. Various sorts of proboscidea, any animals with long noses, like elephants. But this is a mastodon, the mammoth, and something called a pygmy mammoth. They sound kind of fun. Steller's sea cow, saber-toothed cat, at least 10 species of wolf, giant short-faced bear, giant beaver, Jefferson's ground sloth, Shaska's ground sloth. They even had a North American camel. Who would have thought it? Again, eaten by people. There was something called a glyptodont. I mean, what a shame we don't have these things walking about the place. A few different sorts of giant deer, like our elk, and bison. What? But there are bison. Yes, there are still some bison in North America, but there used to be many sorts of bison. And so those are just some of the species that humans have managed to kill off. As we've gone up in population, everything else, not quite everything else, but most other species have gone down. So don't be fooled by thinking, oh yeah, if you live in simple way, you don't do any harm. You may not do it as quickly if all you have is a bow and arrow and a plough, but humans everywhere throughout time have been causing havoc. New Zealand, it's just a few hundred years ago that people first arrived in New Zealand, and there they had the giant moa, like a big ostrich, but much, much bigger. No more. And that's not to get at anybody, it's just to say this is what humans do. It's not a judgment in any way, it's just an observation. And actually, humans, poor humans, rather than the rich ones with the guns, poor humans are far more likely to eat whatever they can get hold of. This is what is euphemistically called bush meat. If you go to many countries in Africa, you don't quite know what you're getting, but it's probably endangered these days. You can see a pangolin there in the middle. Approximately 150,000 extinctions. Nobody knows for sure. It's actually going up. We've killed most of the big things. Well, now we're getting all the small things that lots of them don't even have names. And I think this could perhaps describe humans, an unusually large number of animals overwhelming a place and causing excessive damage, which is one of the definitions of the word plague. We do it these days, not with guns, mostly it's just destruction of environment. Who would have thought it? Just, cutting down forests to grow food for humans. Not just food, of course, it's actually the space that humans take up. This is a small part of Mexico City, apparently. And it's all around the world. As I say, as it were, a city the size of Cork every day extra. And in this country, we're talking about the government wants to build 80,000 homes every year. Well, where exactly? And what about the roads and all the other infrastructure needed? We have a big impact on the rest of the world. Now, there are people who think that humans are the most important, and we're even taught that maybe the other animals don't really matter. But for me, I want to live in a world where elephant shrews aren't endangered. I mean, what a sweet little thing that is. And also, pangolins, completely harmless, just going about their business. One of the rarest sorts, a Nubian giraffe, one of the rarest sorts left. And these lads, the hairy-nosed wombats. They've recovered slightly, but there were, just a couple of years ago, there were only 35 left on the planet. You think, what? Who would do that? Who would cut down the forests just for food? Well, of course, we did. In this country, we did a huge amount of that. Ireland used to be covered in forestry, not necessarily big old trees. In some places it would have been lots and lots of big old trees. Other places much more open and scrubby, but very few of them left. Humans, there were apparently 6 deforestation events since the last ice age in Ireland. One of them was caused mostly by climate change, but the rest have been caused by humans, apparently. And of course, we cut down the trees to grow food, but when the trees are cut down, the soil washes away. Now you can't grow anything. So lots of Ireland looks like this. But it's actually, our consciousness has changed so much that now people think this is an unspoiled, natural landscape. Whereas, of course, it's utterly spoiled. It's a desert compared with the way it used to be. And it's a human-made desert, just as the Amazon, cutting down the jungle in the Amazon, it's exactly the same thing. We just did it further back in time, but the effects are still here. Except we've got so used to it, we think this is normal. It's not normal. But, however, humans have done really, really well. So, maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's fine that the other species haven't done so well. But, to quote Jimmy Cliff, the singer, the harder they come, the harder they fall. I was trying to seg my way into the next part. The problem is, when you have lots and lots of people, they become more vulnerable if something goes wrong. And the more people there are, the more vulnerable they are. And we know a lot about famine in this country. Here is a graph of the population of Ireland in the last 500 years. It looks a little complicated. I'm just trying to make it a little clearer. First, potatoes. Woohoo! 1600 approximately. Very, very important throughout Europe and Russia. And of course, the population began to build up after that. In fact, look at that, it went from 1 million close to 3 million. But then there was a horrible famine, and nearly a third of the people in Ireland died because it wasn't any diseases. It was just a really shockingly wet and late spring, followed by a very cold and early winter, and millions died. And we've forgotten it all because the population rose hugely after that. Nearly 9 million people lived in Ireland, and pretty much the same thing happened again, except this time it was disease, as we know, and the population crashed again, and it was appalling. But not that long ago, here's a photo from Carrow in County Galway, taken at that time. People had cameras and were walking around. It's not quite our great-grandparents' time, but it's not so distant. And the effects, of course, are still with us today. I would say sort of genetically, epigenetically, socially, environmentally, lots of different ways that famine still impacts on everybody here. This always gets me, this quote: "People fought and killed each other over the blackberries before they were ripe." Can you imagine the circumstances? You're desperately trying to feed your children. What do? You do pretty much anything. And it wasn't that there wasn't any food. There was still plenty of food, but not enough. And so the price went from half of your income to way more than your income. So rich people didn't go hungry. They never go hungry in times of famine because there's always something to eat if you've got the money. Poor people couldn't afford it. I don't know why, but lots of people seem to think that the potato famine only affected Ireland. Well, of course it didn't, because the same fungus spread throughout the potatoes wherever they were growing. It's true that in Ireland more people were killed, but if you lived in the north of England or in the Highlands of Scotland and your family were caught up and ran out of food and you couldn't afford any more, the effect was pretty much the same wherever you were. Shocking though they are a vital part of human history, and they were a way of regulating population. This is just a few of the many famines recorded since we've been writing things down. I'll just skip ahead. Look, 1016 famine throughout Europe, Great Famine in Europe. There's too many to list. That one, that Great Famine in Europe, we still have an echo of it today in the story of Hansel and Gretel in the woods, where the children were abandoned because the parents couldn't feed them, and there were people hunting and eating children. That's a fairy story, but it's based on fact, and there's so many more examples of that right up to the current day of desperate things that desperate people do. Oh, sorry, I'll just carry on with this little list. Famine in England, another famine in England. Famine in Scotland, 15% of the population died. 2 million people in France. Famine in Finland, in France. There's that early one, the famine in Ireland, 1740. It's another one, 1800, famine in Ireland. It doesn't really show up. It doesn't impact the graph because the population was growing so fast. Year without a summer, it doesn't take much to have a food shortage. If you just miss your harvest because it's too wet, everybody struggles. See that 1846 Highland potato famine in Scotland. Another famine at the bottom in Ireland, 1879. Who's heard of that one? Everywhere you look in the history of every country on the planet is a history of famines and wars, but famines for now. 1921, 5 million killed in Russia, 5 million in China. They just keep coming. That one at the top, 1973, famine in Ethiopia. That's the one I first remember when I was a child. And they were talking about it on Blue Peter. And it was shocking. It was on the television. And as I remember, we saved milk bottle tops and collected them and sent them in to save the children. And I thought, you know, that was a big deal. It's sort of a little bit significant for me because it made an impact. So I looked at the graph of the population of Ethiopia, just for interest. And, you know, it hasn't got any bigger, but the population has risen hugely. The famine that I'm talking about was then, about 1973. There's another one, a little later. That was the one that triggered Band-Aid. You can see a dent in that line because the population was impacted at that time. That many people died, but it didn't actually slow down the growth of people. And now, so at that time, there were approximately 40 million people. Now there is approximately 120 million people in the same space. Shocking, awful things happen. This is the Netherlands. And in the Second World War time, these children apparently are eating soup made from tulip bulbs. And you think, well, okay, but it's the same sort of desperate measures that would bring people to eat their seed potatoes or cut down their apple trees to sell, to buy some food. It's just stealing from the future just because they're desperate today. People eat boiled leaves and other things. Close your eyes if you don't want to see. There's another slide that's coming up if you don't want to watch it. Other things that desperate people eat. Lots of cases of that around the world. Here's a picture of Bantry. I find this really interesting that if you look at not just a picture of Bantry, but anywhere, especially up the west side of Ireland, one of those, you know, this could be, I don't know, 1930s or something, you'll notice that a little bit different from today is the lack of vegetation on the hillsides. And there's partly a cultural reason for that, that big trees became the property of the landlord. But we're not talking about big trees, we're talking about everything that could be cut and harvested and sold. Here's the same sort of thing in Skibbereen. Just very little left. The hedges have been stripped, cut down. This is long after the famine, but this is still a legacy that you can see today, how the damage that was done by people to their local environment because they were desperate. Palestinian mountain gazelles. I wonder how many of these live now in Gaza, for instance. This isn't about famine, this is just something from my personal family. My mum was a child in wartime London, and at that time food was very, very short, and instead of the poorest people starving to death, because actually they managed to avoid that, they rationed everything. It's a big pile of tea. This was food for one adult for 1 week. And Many people lost a great deal of weight through. They were ill by the end of the war. It only just came in time to stop lots of starvation, but for the most part, it was a tremendous success, the rationing. And I remember my mum, and she still does it, when she cracks open an egg to make a cake, she uses her thumb to clean out the shell to get the last little bit of egg. And I just wonder how many people still do that. And it's just, there you go. I just think it's, for me, it's a direct link with those times, because I don't do it. I'm too wealthy. I don't have to worry about that little thing. How lucky am I? Okay, so I've changed the scale of this from millions to billions so that we can fit that line in on one piece of paper.
So can I just give you a time check?
Oh, sorry.
It's 3 o'clock.
Oh, my goodness. I'm sorry, do you want to have half time? We'll come back next year. I'm sorry, is it taking too long?
You have another 20 minutes.
There is a... Okay, we're going to have to go faster. Faster, Tim, faster. Okay, I just wanted to point out a few little bits. Within this last couple of 100 years, all these huge events and all the millions of people who died basically haven't had any effect on the population graph. There's a slight kink around the Second World War, but in Europe, for instance, the population recovered in 6 years. Mostly down to food. This apparently is, it's not a pig farm, is it? A pig factory. There it is. In China, the biggest one in the world. It's in this country we have produced cows that can produce vast amounts of milk. We have bred grotesque, perhaps you could describe, animals. We've just gone a long way to producing more and more food. And it's not just growing food, it's harvesting. I mean, it's not fishing, is it? It's sort of vacuuming up the sea. We've cut down all the forests, now we're growing, what's it called? Palm oil, avocados, soybeans, and there are people everywhere. Lots and lots of people. People. But Tim, hang on, the birth rate is falling. I hear it all the time. People are getting worried that there won't be enough people soon in Europe to pay the pensions and all that. And it's true in a way that the birth rate has fallen dramatically in the last 100 years or so. But so is the death rate, which is why the population keeps rising. And it's not just about food these days. We've got rid of all the predators. We've pretty much got rid of starvation if we shared it out. And we have tackled disease, so very recently, and including in that is the safer childbirth, huge thing, a huge thing for people. Many women used to die in childbirth. Okay, look, this is a little bit of statistics because it's important. So on average, 5 babies each in the last few thousand years. In Ireland, for cultural reasons mostly, for poverty and religion, the birth rate was higher. It was 7 per woman. And now it's down to 1.5 per woman on average. Of course, many people choose not to have any babies. Many people would love to have babies but are unable to. But I'm just talking about the maths here. The replacement, the number that you need, is 2.1. The 0.1 part is the number of babies who are born but don't make it into adulthood. So that number could actually probably be lower than that, 0.01 or 0.05. We're living in a time of peace and prosperity and choices in Ireland. when people feel under pressure for whatever reason, that birth rate jumps up. So Palestine and Israel, way more than normal. It's the same that happened in Northern Ireland when the Troubles were on. Both sides were trying to basically outbreed the other side. It's nowhere near the highest though. Niger, 6.6 babies per woman on average. And in fact, the 40 countries with the highest fertility or birth rates are all in Africa. So we've been looking at China and India, but actually all the action is in Africa. You just wait till that mushrooms out. But it does show, in a way, that if we do have a prosperous society and give women choice over their bodies, and there's enough food and people don't feel under stress, then the birth rate does fall. But of course, not everybody lives like we do. A great many people live in poverty. Apparently, Oxfam says 5.4 billion people don't have access to a washing machine. I can't remember why I put this one in, but I'll just jump ahead and, oh yeah, right. So we're getting closer to the end of this talk. Here we are here at the top of this precarious graph. But just remember that when I was born, that graph will be down here. And when my parents were born, we're down there. What happens next? I don't know. Nobody knows what's happened next. I'll tell you one thing, it can't keep doing this. It's just mathematically impossible because we're using so many of the resources on the planet that soon we need 2 planets and then 4 planets, then 8 planets and 16 planets. It cannot happen. So at some point, that graph has to change shape. Now, many people will say, oh yeah, we'll stabilize the population about 9 billion people. When I first looked at this, we're going to stabilize the population about 7.5 billion people. But that was a little while ago now. If we did manage this and maintained a stable population, then that's called a stable state. And it's very interesting, but very, very difficult. A stable state means 0 population growth, and that means 0 economic growth, which terrifies governments. We have become so used to this idea that we have to have growth in everything. But if we were to stop growing and actually stop killing things off, it would mean the end to lots of businesses that depend on growth. We'd also have to stop, with the finite resources, stop using them all up, because we're trying to build something that is actually permanent and sustainable, in the sense that almost nobody uses the word sustainable. It means it can carry on and on and on. Now, I'm not going to, I could go a lot into this, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to show you an example. From Ireland, I just looked it up, average economic growth, 8.7%. And economists love that kind of thing. And that means a doubling of the economy in 8 years. And that means, crudely, that everything goes up, everything doubles, prices double, the amount of energy used is doubled, the amount of raw materials used is doubled, and the number of customers needed is also doubled. This is why there's so much pressure on people to have babies. They actually, in lots of countries, encouraged more babies all the time. And of course, lots of people just think, oh, we need them to pay my pension. I'm going to be a pensioner soon. I need people to start paying that. Which seems rather short-sighted to me. Now, as I say, it's very rare because it's very, very complicated. One of the things that we would have to replace to maintain a stable state is the amount of fossil fuels we've been using. And as you know, ubiquitous everywhere, the use of fossil fuels. We used to think, oh, all those poor people dependent entirely on potatoes. Now the entire world is dependent on diesel for farming and transport. Fossil fuels for energy production. We'd have to replace all that, remembering that we haven't replaced any fossil fuels so far. All the green energy that we've been making has just been added on the top. And we'd have to replace it indefinitely. No hiccups. But what a nice idea. Let's stabilize the whole system, because, look, in Ireland, if we fixed it now, we've got plenty of food, lots of people have grand houses, maybe two, enormous cars, maybe two. They think it's normal to go on holiday in an aeroplane. It's not normal, people. It's not normal at all. But if we stabilise it here in Ireland, we'd also be stabilising it everywhere. So the people who live like this, why should they live like this? There are, as I say, almost no examples of stable state economies in the world, but here's one. Tikopia in Polynesia. Fine people live there and have lived there. They live mostly on fishing. And when the explorers turned up in about 1600, the population was approximately 1,200 and maintained at that rate with 0% population growth for hundreds of years. Then the missionaries turned up. This is how they were doing it. Abstinence, celibacy, contraception, also abortion, infanticide, suicide, and virtual suicide. So they were trying to stop babies being born, but when babies were born, they had to resort to more drastic things. Now the missionaries said, no way, can't be doing that. They stopped doing that, population shot up, and inevitably it crashed. They have since stabilized the population. It's actually a little less than it used to be because of the damage done when it was so high. And it's a bit complicated to tell, of course, because people no longer have to be killed. They can now move and flip burgers in New Zealand or wherever. There are alternatives to living on the island. But theoretically, now they know what they're doing, they could have a stable state economy in a simple way indefinitely. And that would put those people up amongst the smartest people on the planet, I would suggest. I do like his pipe. Because we're talking about fitting in with the actual resources of the planet, and if we could balance that out, all would be well. But the problem is, if that was our goal, the goalposts are moving. As you know, the climate is changing and drying out, getting hot, lots and lots of more rain. So very, very difficult to match our needs with what's really available when what's available is changing so quickly. And of course, lots of people, desperate people, are moving from hard times, trying to get to a better life, just as Irish people have done too. So if that doesn't happen, what else could happen? Well, of course, this could happen. And there's two ways to get that shape: voluntarily, as if, and involuntarily. Are we really out of time now?
We've 5 minutes.
I'm going to go even quicker now. Okay. Okay, so we're back. If that graph comes true, and I don't know what's going to happen, then this is the kind of imagery that has been used to signify that dropping side of the graph. As it's risen, people have been doing well, and most babies survive. To get that graph to go down, considering all those famines and wars that didn't really change anything at all, then we are talking big stuff. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, no less, would be needed to make that sort of thing happen. And you think, well, hang on a minute, that's very drastic. Are you sure? Well, you know, I was saying there are very few examples of the horizontal graph. There are loads of examples of this shape graph. This is algae on a pond, use up all the resources, dies. This is bacteria in a petri dish, same thing. But we are not algae or bacteria. Here's an example of mammals, St. Matthew Island. There weren't any caribou, so they brought caribou in so that in the Second World War, so that would be something to eat for people, sailors, passing by. This is the graph of the population of caribou on that island, because it mushroomed, because there was food, and then there wasn't any food, and it crashed, and they did so much damage to the landscape that, in fact, those last, it says 42, but the last ones died in the 80s. There's too much damage done. So all you would see now are the skeletons. Here's another example. This is humans, Easter Island, as you know. This is a graph of the population of humans. They didn't arrive till about 400, year 400, and they survived mostly on fishing, but they needed to make wooden boats. So they cut down the trees to make wooden boats until there weren't any more trees left, so they couldn't go fishing, and the population crashed. So, unless something bizarre happens, and it could do, but I'd say we're in for a sort of bumpy ride. The point is, what are you doing, Tim? What a miserable old talk. Well, I'm trying to get across what exceptional times we live in and how lucky we are, and what a wonderful world that it still is in so many ways. You just have to look out the window. It's a wonderful, wonderful world, and we are the luckiest people ever to live in this world at this time, in this place, with so much going for us. So I hope that sort of puts our lives, my life, in perspective, and I hope that it does the same sort of thing for you. And I couldn't resist a small joke at the end. But I promise, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do thank you so much for your time.